Hello everybody, Justin from Silence in the Storm here. I wanted to record a short little video about how the power of words can be used to organize our consciousness. Now, it shouldn't necessarily come as a big surprise that this is the case, because this idea that the word is really important has been around for a very long time. I mean, in the Bible and in Genesis, they speak of the word being used to actually manifest the universe. We've heard about the power of words, obviously, to shape people's consciousness through, propaganda and forms of subliminal influencing like mind control, social engineering, things like this. So words are pretty well recognized already as being powerful. But do we really truly recognize the power that they have on our own consciousness, especially insofar as how we create a narrative that we use to guide our lives? Well, one thing that should be noted here is that we have different levels of perception. We have perception with the physical body, right? Then we have the perception that comes through, that we receive in our brains through imaging. Then we have perception that is more subjective. So, for example, you might see an image, or you might hear a song, and then you're perceiving a feeling in relation to that song. But that feeling kind of comes through your belief system and whatnot, whether you like it, whether it's something that's inspired you in the past. So there's different levels of perception. And the narrative, the story that we use to navigate our world, the beliefs that we have, the worldviews that we have, directly affects what we perceive and how we respond to things. So one of the things that happens when you speak words, when you use words, is you use the linguistic aspects of your consciousness. Now, the linguistic centers, they operate using the both left and the right brain. So the left brain is traditionally used for, let me make sure I don't know which hand is going to be used for what here, so I'll just use the words. The left brain is traditionally associated with logic, reason, sequential events, rationality, things like this, but more so differentiation. Okay, now the right brain is for holistic function, blending things together, creativity, impressions, things like this. Well, when you take a raw experience, the raw experience we have, like as you're listening to me speak right now, you're thinking much faster than you would be if you were to try to verbalize your own thoughts. And in psychology, we call this kind of the thought stream, or the concept stream. The term gestalt also refers to this. So what a gestalt basically is it's a body of information that is stored in the psyche that relates to some stimulus or thing. So for example, the feeling, everything that comes through in your experience when you're eating your favorite food, all of that is like a tapestry of gestalts, or it's kind of like the elementary particles of consciousness you could think of. Well, when you have a basic raw experience, that experience is filled with tons of images. It's replete with gestalts. And what the word replete means is that it's very highly detailed. So it's very similar to a fractal. There's a lot of data packed into a single experience. As a matter of fact, there's so much data that the vast majority of the information that's in that experience is filtered out. It's categorized. And that the agency, or the mechanism that categorizes the information that we receive from our raw experience, is basically your belief systems, what you tell yourself your story is, how you organize your reality. That's going to determine how you categorize experience. Well, as soon as you verbalize an experience, because of the nature of verbalization is within the temporal realm. So what I mean by that is when you take a statement, either a written one or a verbal statement, that each word comes in succession. So it's a temporal phenomenon, and it operates in time and space. And the meaning of the statement happens in holistic chunks, but is dependent on the words in that statement. Okay? So why is that important? Well, it's important because in the act of verbalizing something, by speaking it or writing about it, what you do is you use a new aspect of your consciousness. You gain a new perspective on whatever that experience is, and it's associative. So this is really helpful, and we know this a lot because of our studies into trauma and what effect speaking about your trauma and speaking about deleterious experiences has on your relationship to the experience. Now, a lot of people who suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, they have a really hard time unpacking their experience. The experience is so intense that the hippocampus and the amygdala, which are basically the places where your sympathetic nervous system triggers your fight or flight response, that is one aspect where that happens. It gets kind of stuck in emergency mode, and you're just flooded with very intense emotions, and it's hard to dissociate. It's hard to reflect on the experience. Now, normally we hear the word dissociate and we think that's a bad thing, and it certainly can be used, or there are instances where we can say that person is dissociating in a negative way. But there's also positive dissociation. And one of the ways that positive dissociation happens is when you're recounting a story, especially if you're doing it in a way that tries to gain a new perspective on it. So all of this is very powerful because through the use of our words, we can go through and analyze our own experiences and develop a new narrative, a new perspective on it. It's also, we got to be careful with our words, because if we're using our words to precondition or add bias to our consciousness, then we may not be expanding our definition, we may not be expanding our consciousness, we may be putting it into more boxes. So let me give you a couple of examples here. When people have had a very intense experience, usually a positive one, and I don't want to focus on only negative ones, but let's say you've had a very positive kind of maybe a near-death experience or a spiritual awakening, or maybe you just had a good time with your friends. Well, usually we want to talk about it, right? And when we talk about it, we gain a new perspective on that experience, and it allows us to create, basically what it does linguistically in the brain is or the mind I should say, but this also happens in the brain, is it creates a secondary image, a secondary impression that is more neutral. And because it's more emotionally neutral, it's more open. It actually has the ability to integrate with other ideas more easily. That's why one of the great things you can do to expand your own self-knowledge of self is to engage in philosophy. Because philosophy is the process of taking ideas, creating a secondary image that you can use to analyze it objectively. So it's like holding an idea in your hand, right? And then through that, you're observing this idea, you're getting inferences about, okay, well, this connects to this connects to that, this connects to this. It's not as necessarily easy to do that type of reflection when we're in the midst of a really challenging or intense emotion, whether it's positive or negative. So that's one of the things that happens when we verbalize. We gain a new perspective on it. It makes the experience more replete because there's a new gestalt associated to it, a new concept. And then we can start to change the narrative that we have in relation to that. Now, when it comes to negative experiences, the same thing can happen. We can take a negative experience and we can speak about it to our friend, and we may vent about it. And this is where we got to be careful, because the nature of the narrative that we use to vent is going to precondition our consciousness. It's going to add like a program of interpretation. So for example, if you're at your job and your boss isn't necessarily giving you the respect that you need, you may vent to some of your coworkers, be like, my boss, this woman, she's always so crabby, and every time I open my mouth, it's like she just judges me before I even get any two words out. And I feel totally disempowered. And, this is why I just need to keep my mouth shut and not voice my opinion ever, because every time I do, people just throw it in my face again. So hopefully it should become obvious that the way that person contextualized the narrative, the way that they interpreted it and understood it and then wove it into the fabric of their lives, wasn't too empowering, was it? Their interpretation actually kind of placed a limitation. It disempowered them. It didn't empower them. It didn't help them expand beyond the limits of what they were telling themselves about their lives. It actually I specifically chose an example where somebody already feels disempowered. Remember, I recall I said, this always happens to me, and this is why I shouldn't speak my mind. So when we're using our language, especially when we speak, okay, because we're auditory creatures, especially when it comes to language, when you're reading things, you're kind of using the auditory center of your mind to listen to what you're reading. So what I mean, this is important, because what I'm getting at here is how you tell the story is going to either precondition you to be empowered and assisted in your life, or you're going to be disempowered. So a friend of mine, Carm, she mentions this term, and I really like it. It's called pre-paving. I don't know where she got it from, but the basic idea is that using affirmations, using words, we can basically set up kind of places of consciousness that we can move to. So, for example, if you're somebody who always gets pissed off and upset in traffic, because let's face it, traffic isn't necessarily all that fun, but we're talking about changing the narrative of our life so that we can feel more empowered, happy, and capable in our own spheres, right? So how do we do that? Well, we want to create a narrative that acknowledges those desires and values. So if you want to try to bring in a different type of consciousness when you're in traffic, you can say, well, I'm about to go into traffic today. And despite the fact that this has irritated me and annoyed me in the past, I completely love and accept myself in this situation. And I'm going to take the time to be forgiving and open to allowing other people to come in. I'm not going to feel as though my territory is the entire highway and I feel like I need to defend that. So if somebody wants to come in, even if they want to cut me off, it's okay. I'm going to let them come. And in the act of doing so, I'm going to become better at forgiveness. I'm going to be more service to others, and service to others is something I value. Okay, so what I've tried to do here in detail is that when we make our story rich and replete, when we specifically try to account for maybe our setbacks, which is one of the NLP techniques, it's also a technique for emotional freedom techniques. So you use an affirmation to describe something that maybe you hadn't done the way you ideally wanted. You forgive yourself, you let go of that baggage, and then you try to create a story or a narrative that actually gives you a way to be more forgiving. In this situation, I'm talking about traffic. So that's what I mean by the power of these words to build a coherent narrative, because literally it shapes the way that we organize our world. If conversely, if you tell yourself, and often this happens kind of subtly, so you don't even really know you're doing it, but you're about to go to traffic, and then you think about the prospect of going to traffic, and maybe your eyes roll, and you're like, ugh, I'm not going to have to deal with this again. Well, you've just pre-paved in a negative way, haven't you? You've just created and you've reinforced a story in your own mind that says that sitting in traffic and being cut off and having to sit and wait for other cars to go is something you don't like, you're not going to enjoy, that you're going to hate. So be mindful of the words that you use. Ask yourself, what is the story that I'm telling myself? If you were, as a tip, it's a good way to know what your own story is. Well, how would you describe your situation to a close friend? Be honest. Are you describing the situation in a way that empowers you? Or are you describing the situation in a way that makes you feel like the victim so you can gain sympathy? And I ask you these questions not because I'm judging you, like, you shouldn't do that. Because we all do it, let's face it. We need to be able to express ourselves authentically because we don't want to try to mask over our own authentic feelings. Okay? But at the same time, we need to be authentic and express, but then also try to guide ourselves into a more coherent and empowered and useful way of thinking. I was going to say enlightened, but I didn't necessarily want to, trigger anybody with that word. But the point is that we want to be pragmatic. We want to be useful. We want to be empowered in the way that we do things in our lives. So creating a narrative and creating a story that allows you to do that is really important. And the secret is, get closer. We're doing this all the time anyway. We're always coming up with statements to describe our world, even if we don't use words to do it. The linguistic center is always operating. We're reacting to our experiences constantly. So being aware of how you react to your experiences is really important. So develop self-awareness, okay? Then start to consciously assess this narrative by honestly asking yourself how you would describe this to a friend, okay? And then do the last thing in this little tip train I'm giving you here, which is use your philosophic process. Ask yourself, why is that narrative that you're using? Why are you using that narrative? What do you think a better narrative would be? Why is that narrative better? Actually try to get some detail. Build a case. Build an argument for why you're trying to move into this new narrative. And the more you're able to do that, the more your narratives all weave together into a single cohesive narrative. Now you're really on track. So as a final piece to this, the consciousness of the spirituality and natural law and kind of the service to others philosophy is a really great preconceived or ready-made narrative to weave yourself into. So let me just take a moment to describe this here. For my own life, so how do I deal with hardship? It's like, well, Justin, this all sounds really good, but when you're in the throes of having to deal with something, when you're triggered, when you're upset, what do you do? Well, I'll tell you right now that I would answer that question by saying I get triggered all the time. I mean, there's constantly things that can happen that throw me off of my emotional equanimity on my path, and I have to kind of relook at the situation. And one of the things I do is first I allow myself to authentically express my feelings, or at least I try to. And then once I have done that, I self-reflect and I'm like, okay, is that mode of expression, is that story I just told for myself, is that in alignment with my highest and best good? Is that in alignment with what has been called the higher self or the enlightened path? Okay, or is that in service of the all, or to use a Christian term, is that the will of the Father? Is that the will of the Creator? Well, if I, in my evaluation, my philosophic evaluation of that, and I'm saying, is that? If I don't think it is, well, then I ask myself, well, what narrative could I use that would be more in alignment? So, for example, if I like last week, I'll use this little anecdote, and then I got to go. Actually, got to record an interview here in a moment. But I've been working on a lot of projects behind the scenes with SITS. As some of you may know, I haven't been producing a lot of videos. I haven't been writing a lot of original content. I haven't been offering a lot of commentaries because most of my time right now is going to behind the scenes things with upgrades to Stillness in the Storm website, new projects that are developing, things like this. All sorts of things I hope to talk to about here in the future. Well, I haven't been devoting a lot of time to things that I need for my own personal benevolence. And what I mean by that is I'm not necessarily doing as much research. I'm not doing as a lot of writing. And those things are really important to me. That's one of the ways that I express myself, and I allow myself to feel empowered, expressive, like I'm actually doing the work that I think I need to be doing, that to feel purposeful. So because of that, I got pretty triggered. I had a situation happen where something got dropped in my lap. It was going to require a lot of time. And I'm sitting there like, I kind of got into a pity part. I was like, man, I don't have time to do anything. I'm not even doing what the hell I enjoy doing. I'm doing all this self-sacrifice work to make stillness better, and blah blah blah. And I had like this whole like narrative, and I just vented it all out. Well, after I got it all out of my system, I thought back, and I'm like, that probably wasn't the best way to handle the situation. I'm glad that I allowed myself to express the way I needed to, but what can I do to change the situation? Maybe I can look at things differently. So then I started to think, well, because I have this belief, and that I've supported through research and an epistemic evaluation, so philosophical evaluation. And the belief is basically that all experience happens for a reason. All experience is perfectly tailored for your personal evolution, or my personal evolution in this case. So if I truly believe that, then the narrative that I can use to recontextualize that experience is, well, Justin, what you're going through right now is part of your soul growth. And everything that you went through, all this experience, literally everything, is part of that. So if I take that perspective and then do a little bit more work to actually ask the questions, okay, well, how can I, in this specific situation, look to understand that this was actually an empowering thing? Then what often tends to happen, what did happen is that I felt much better. I took a little break. I got out of my headspace. I did some reading, which I hadn't done in like a few days. I allowed myself to take some notes and write down some inferences and thoughts that I had about the reading, which for me, that's like the really enjoyable part of research. And man, within like an hour, I felt so much better, so much better. And then I kept bringing that narrative in again. I kept using it as an affirmation. I brought that narrative into the situation in my daily life. So once you have that narrative built, once you have that affirmation and that intention codified or sealed in a set of words that you can speak to yourself, okay, then you can use it very similar to like a magic ritual incantation. And then you can constantly attune yourself back to that narrative that's going to make you empowered, that's going to make you more receptive to your experience and your circumstances, so that you can face these challenges, and in the act of facing them, learn and grow. Well, thanks everybody for watching. It was a little bit longer than I thought, but that's okay. when you're in the flow, it just all comes. So please share your comments on this. I'm really curious to hear how other people process their experience, and I'm also curious to hear how other people use language and writing, even potentially, to organize their lives. And but let me end this video with a question. Do you think that you're somebody that uses language to organize your life in a more empowered way, or do you think that you're somebody that tends to use language to box yourself into disempowered corners? And I'll answer this for myself right now, and I think I do both. I'm trying to be more empowered, but as I mentioned earlier, let's face it, I'm human, and we all have these moments of being out of our space, being in, feeling triggered, feeling upset, and it's okay to release that. So what is your response? What do you think? How do you handle your life situations? Do you think that you only have positive narratives for yourself? Do you acknowledge your negative narratives? Are you reflecting on those? Love to hear your thoughts. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate the support through Patreon and PayPal. I appreciate the ad clicks, and much love. Take care and be blessed on your path.